It is my pleasure to introduce to you tonight first Michelle Pomerantz. She is the Cuyahoga County Director of Regional Collaboration, and she's here to talk to you a little bit about the 2020 census. And so I will turn this over to Michelle.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Michael Barron, for giving me the opportunity to speak today. It's always good to be at the Lakewood, or where's my Lakewood? I'm here today as the Director of Regional Collaboration to talk to you a little bit about the 2020 census. And the first number I want to reach out and throw at you is 1814. And that's not the beginning of that little song. In 1814, we took a little trip, which is a great song. 1814 is the amount of money that it costs for each person in Ohio that is not counted in the 2020 census. $1,814 is what it costs for each person that is not counted in 2020 census. And that funding is extremely important to the state of Ohio and Cuyahoga County in particular. Ohio loses $1,814, which totals to be about $675 billion in federal funds, grants, and support to states, counties, and communities based on census data. So in 2010, the last time the census was taken, the county government was in a little bit of a shift, and there really wasn't anyone taking the leadership role of Cuyahoga County Census, except for our friends in the Planning Commission, who were very helpful with producing maps. So fast forward 2020 census, the county executive has decided that it was important to make sure that we have a complete count committee that incorporates all 59 municipalities and works in conjunction, collaboration, and coordination with the city of Cleveland. So the strategy around the 2020 census was to include Simeon Best, who is the program manager in Health and Human Services and does the outreach on voter outreach. So that was a decision that was made because so much of this funding and so much of this money is needed in terms of support for those who receive HHS services, that it was important to make sure that we had a collaboration impactful for the complete count committee. So we've got the Planning Commission working with the Director of Regional Collaboration, working with the Communications Department, and working with the Planning Commission and also the Department of Sustainability to make sure that we have a county-wide approach to helping support the 2020 census. So I wanted to let you know that there are 16 largest programs that are impacted by the census. Are the Section 8 housing assistance payments, which equals $459 million, special education grants, National School Lunch Program, State Children's Health Insurance Program, which is SCHIP, Head Start, Early Head Start, which is $323 million, $1.1 billion for Medicaid, Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, or SNAP, Medicare Part B, Highway Planning and Construction, Title I grants, and also the health center programs. So those are just a few of the sampling of programs that are impacted by that 2010-2020 census count. It's important also to note that the census will be taken starting in the month of March in 2020. 2020 March, according to the data that we have from the U.S. Census Bureau, will help us count those homeless and hard-to-count populations, including folks who are incarcerated. I was just talking to my colleague, Crystal Bryant. The weird thing about the censuses and with prisons is they will count, like Marion is a prison there, so Marion County will get the benefit for all of the people that are counted in the Marion County facility, and they'll get all the funding, even though when they're returned back to their communities, likely they'll be back in Cuyahoga County. Just another little twerk there. So the point I'm trying to make is that we'll be working both with our homeless, our veterans, our associations are also with Crystal Bryant, and to make sure that we are counting everyone so that every person in Cuyahoga County gets a chance to be counted. Every dollar that's associated with them gets a chance to stay within Cuyahoga County and within the state of Ohio. The other point I want to make is that the year is a little bit slow information coming out from the U.S. Census Bureau. There is very little money that has been given by the federal administration towards the census. And even in the state of Ohio, Governor DeWine has not yet committed to providing extra funding to help make sure that every person is counted. Another problem with the census, and while we're starting so early and putting out so many efforts, is that there is a citizenship question that is being considered to be part of the 2020 census. The idea of asking someone whether they're a U.S. citizen or not is going to be going to the, I believe it's going to go to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they're going to decide and determine that. So when I look at the idea of they haven't counted, they're hard to count populations that already exist, they're not putting any funding for the program, they're slow to give any information. I don't think it's a coincidence that the lack of support and the lack of communication, as well as the potential threat of putting a citizenship question on there, is not some draconian effort to make sure that we aren't counting the hard-to-count communities, including those who speak a second language, including those who are potential immigrants and come from immigration families. So that's one of the reasons why the county executive wanted to make sure that we were putting top brass onto this idea of making sure that the county serves as a toolkit for each and every community that wants to make sure that they're working on the census. I want to make sure that I give you an opportunity to note, right now, 2020 census temporary jobs are available now. This flyer is out on the table. It pays about $18.50 per hour. We need about 6,000 jobs, and so far we have not come close to getting the maximum number of people who are needed for the census. I know my buddy Mike over there is always looking for poll workers, and it's that same kind of thing. Without those workers and having the ability to count, it's going to cost us more money to find those hard-to-count populations. The other thing is the toolkit, and this is the one that I'm hoping everyone can pick up. The www.cuyahogacounty.us 2020 census has a website that's dedicated to the frequently asked questions, has different kind of downloads that you can put to make sure that you're sharing this information not only for the jobs, but also the importance of the census. We have a whole slew of summer activities this summer, and right now we don't have any extra funding for the census, but we're working on finding ways that we can use as subcommittee chairs that are parts of the education committee, the faith-based community, small business organizations. I know Michael Barron is part of the communications subcommittee group, so that we're sharing and transferring as much information as possible electronically and giving folks an opportunity to add the tagline, Census 2020, Cuyahoga County.us 2020 Census, either emails, just to make sure that we're promoting the awareness phase. After the awareness phase between June, July, and August, we'll get closer. Hopefully we'll have a little more direction and information from the federal government, and we can put together a campaign to make sure that we're including ways to increase our opportunities to the hard-to-count communities. The hard-to-count communities, which I can send this out, or it's on the website. We hope you'll do a link to it. It's these areas that are shaded in dark blue. And it's those same areas that are most at risk financially and that are most of our customers in Health and Human Services. But you'd be surprised that there are some cities on here, including some neighborhoods in Shaker Heights, some neighborhoods in towards the end of Bedford, and even a little bit towards Brooklyn and Lyndale. So those hard-to-count communities are amongst us as well. And this last thing I'll say before I see if there's any questions is that this is a nonpartisan initiative. So Democrats, Republicans, Green Party, any party, we really hope that you'll encourage the ability to make sure that you are counted. If you would like to be part of one of our subcommittees, we do have a census email address, and again, all you need to do is go to the Census 2020 online and be redirected to finding a way to send us your information. We'll be happy to plug you in. Are there any quick questions before I turn over this fantastic panel? Yes?
How do people contact folks that we want to fill out the form or
So
begin the census?
there's 3 ways. Right now, they're saying that we can do it the old-fashioned way. It takes about 10 minutes. Physical, writing it down on the form.
Well, I mean, are people going to go door to door, knocking
What's
on
going to happen
doors?
is there's 3 ways. One is that for the first time, they're going to have an email opportunity, meaning that you can do this online, you can do the census. One is the sending it into the mail, And you can also do a phone call, meaning if some seniors or somebody wants you to come out. But eventually, after everyone goes through those first month of March and early April, then this is probably going to be a lot of what the temporary jobs are going to be. They're going to be those knock and drops and try to find people to get them to come, to be counted. So all the varieties of methods that they usually use, plus adding an online opportunity as well. Yes?
Yeah, I'm not aware, and it's probably not allowed, but can you combine voter registration?
No.
Seemed like a
The
good
person
idea.
that's in charge of voting registration is going to be also working, the guy, Simeon Best, that does voting registration, he's doing the census, and we're trying to find ways that we can support. So no, we can't do anything other than count census.
We'll do a forum on the census, I promise.
He's
I
cutting
mean,
me. He's cutting.
this is-
But yeah, all the answers no. You can't, I don't know if you're allowed to buy a piece or anything anyways. My email address, if anybody wants to send, is mpomerantz@cuyahogacounty.us. Again, thank you so much for giving me the time today. When you're out and about with your friends and family, it's important to vote, but it's also important to make sure we're counted. Once you're counted, then we'll vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And remember, that was a lot of information thrown at you in a very short period of time. Call the library if you have some questions. We can help you find the information. I forgot to mention before, the panel will be taking questions, and we would like for anyone who has a question to actually write it down ahead of time. Heather over here has has note cards and pens. So if anybody needs one, just kind of give Heather a nod and she'll get something to you.
And once
But,
you have your question filled out, raise it back
Yes,
up.
and she'll collect them as well. So it is now my pleasure to introduce Jen Miller, who is the director of the Ohio League of Women Voters. She will be facilitating this panel, and she'll introduce all the panelists and really get this talk started. So again, thank you for coming, and Jen Miller, the floor is yours.
Hi there. Good evening. All right, so let me ask some questions, just so the panelists can see who we have in the room too. So first, raise your hand if you're a league member. Yep, that's what I like. Raise your hand if you've ever registered voters. That's what I like. Worked as a poll worker. Okay, good. How about worked as an election protection monitor, the 866R vote? Yep, good. Jocelyn trained me to be an election protection monitor back in the day. Okay, raise your hand if you know someone who didn't vote in 2018. Right. So that's obviously why we're here, and I thought it would just be good for us to think about that. The truth is that we all know champions of democracy, and we all know folks who need to be pushed to get more involved. And so that's what we're here to do, and we have a star-studded cast here with us tonight. So first I want to introduce Tony Perlotti. So go ahead and come on up. Tony has been with the Board of Elections here in Cuyahoga County for 12 years, starting in HR, then deputy director, and now the director. He's been in county government since 1997. He's a Lyndhurst resident, that's where he grew up too, and a Cleveland State grad, so homegrown talent right here. I'm going to introduce Crystal. Crystal is the co-founder of Cleveland Votes, which was formed in 2012. And she also is the Cuyahoga County Director for Reentry. She's an attorney, a social worker, grew up in East Cleveland, still lives in Cleveland. We're so glad to have you, Crystal. And can you hear me? Because I don't even know if this is on. Yeah. Okay, good. All right, and then finally, my friend, Mr. Mike Brickner, is with All Voting is Local. He is the Ohio State Director of All Voting is Local. That's a brand new organization, but they just hit the ground running. He's originally did work with the ACLU. He was born and grew up in Van Wert, Ohio, so Northwest Ohio, where they've got a lot of great wind turbines. And he is a graduate of Hiram College, and he got his master's in diversity management from Cleveland State. Okay, so I just want to remind everyone to first mute your phones, right? Second, I wanted to tell you that in the back there are these cards that are by the league, and we can get more of these. Susan and Audrey and everyone knows how to get a hold of me. But it says once every 10 years we get the chance to count every Buckeye. And it's a league, and on the back it says the ABCs of the census, that it's necessary, safe, and easy. So just in case you want that, I am also supposed to remind you that one of the best things you can do to support democracy is to become a league member. So there are league brochures in back too. So democracy is not a spectator sport, as everyone in this room knows. So, but let's get started. Let's start with the very beginning. Why don't people vote, guys? Yes, someone use that microphone.
Well, since it's in my hand. So generally, I speak from the experience just of life experience, and I try to talk about things that I know. And so I represent probably one of the more marginalized communities. In the introduction in the bio, you heard her kind of mention I'm from East Cleveland, and I haven't moved really far. I only live in Fairfax now, so I live in a very urban environment. And so generally, I see a lot of you wonderful men and women out in the community registering people who look like me, who live in a community that has a socioeconomic status that's, I'm very fortunate, not actually quite like mine, but I've been there before. And I've also been in government and service in various roles for 17 years now. So with that being said, I can tell you in just engaging in those various roles and thinking about the individuals who look like me that I've talked to and I get on the ground with, especially in terms of people with backgrounds that go across multiple secular populations, they don't trust the government. We are the problem, don't feel that. And so because they have such a lack of distrust for what we are actually going to do for them, and the fact that we tend to lack collaboration, they feel like their votes doesn't matter, it doesn't count, and so it's a waste of their time. And when people have grew up struggling their entire lives, they see no need to run and go vote because they feel like whether the government does it or does not do it, they know how to struggle. They know how to quote unquote get it out of the mud. So they can hustle for theirs with or without an election. And so they know what it's like not to have. They know what it's like to have. And so for that reason, they tend to not educate themselves on the significance and the power of the vote, what our electorate actually does do for us, and how it impacts even some of the day-to-day things that they do benefit from. And so therefore, they just choose not to go out and exercise their right.
Yeah, I co-sign all of that. But in addition, I think it's important to recognize that, we have made some good advancements in Ohio in terms of making the election system more accessible and easier for people to use it. But there are still a lot of barriers in place. And particularly if you are a working Ohioan who has a lot of family commitments, or you have a lot of other things going on in your life, thinking about registering to vote 35 days before the election is not always on the top of your list of things to do. Requesting an absentee ballot before election day is not always on the top of your list of things to do. If you're moving frequently, there isn't that updating your voter registration file is not always on the top of your list of things to do. And so there are things that we can, I think, do here in the state of Ohio to make the system more accessible for people, to automatically register them to vote or update their voter registration, to allow same-day voter registration. Many states do that where you can show up on election day. You didn't have to think about it 35 days before the election, and you can cast your ballot to vote. We can make vote by mail and early in-person voting more convenient and accessible to people. And then I think it's also really working with communities that are traditionally underrepresented in our voting system. That we don't want to just have an accessible system, but we also want to have an equitable system, and recognizing that people of color, low-income people, people with disabilities, new Americans, that these are all groups of people that have historically been disenfranchised, and that there are, I think, important things that we can do on the state and local level to better include those individuals.
Great.
I don't think there's anything left to say.
Oh, yes, there is.
Well, from my position, working at the Board of Elections, a lot of people don't vote because they don't think it matters, it doesn't count, what's one more vote. So they don't engage in the process. They don't have trust in the process. I have friends and distant family members who don't have trust in the process, and I'm like, don't you trust me? It's what I do every day for a living. But they don't, they don't think it matters, it doesn't count. And so therefore they don't vote, which is, every vote counts. We make sure that we just conducted a recount today, because the difference was 14 votes. And people want to complain, but kind of I say, if you want to complain, you have to vote. That's your ticket to complain. If you don't vote, then you kind of forfeit that. And I think people, a lot of times, they don't vote because they don't understand what they're voting on. They're like, no, what's this election about? Because they, some people figure only the presidential ones matter, and so that's what they gear up for. And then in between that, another 8 elections that they have to vote for, and they're like, well, this is just too burdensome. I don't want to educate myself on it. So then they disengage and they don't do it. And again, for all of the reasons that they said, they think it's confusing to keep their registration up to date. They don't know how you have to go about to do that. Why do you have to do that? Shouldn't it be automatic? The government always knows where I am, and other kind of stuff. But there's processes in place, and to reiterate what they're saying, some of those processes can be simplified and updated, make it a little bit easier, make it a little more automatic. Because a lot of other things are allowed to become automatic with use of technology, and we can do some of those things too. Of course, keeping everything as secure as possible.
So let's start there, Tony. Let's talk about the structural, the kind of the things that actually government can do, or that you are doing here in Cuyahoga County, that helps with access, helps with those kind of structural challenges that some individuals may face when they're thinking about voting.
So we have a community outreach department at Board of Elections with our staff that's their job all day, every day, is to come up with ways to go out and educate the public on how the processes work, voting, registration, absentee, all those types of things. So we make sure that we have funding, we reflect it in our budget, and make sure that happens because it's important. We have to educate people on the ins and outs of voting. So we have a website where we try to put a lot of information out there, try to have it as self-service as possible. We put a lot of effort into that. We try to make it easy to navigate. We're going through a website redo. We try to make it even easier going forward. And we try to, as we develop these things, bring people in so we have a very inclusive and diverse opinion of it. Because sometimes you get too close, and so it seems obvious to you, and then you have to realize, well, no, it's not obvious to everybody else. So we're trying to get better about doing that. We are out in libraries doing voter education pieces, sometimes new pieces of equipment. We make sure we get out there so people are not afraid. We work with media to push things out, social media, all those types of things. So we try to do what we can to educate. Myself, I'm on Ohio Association of Election Officials, which is a group where we lobby politicians for changes in the law. So I'm active in that. I'm on the legislative committee trying to support, testify before committees in Columbus to try to push things out that are better for voters. We do mailings. So those are things that we do at the local level, but we try to involve with our elected officials through lobbyists or just calling them up, trying to get behind and support legislation that does make things easier. Some of the things like postage for absentees and more online things like absentee requests, get behind automatic voter registration and things like that.
Great. So let's break some of those down. Mike, would you like to explain automatic voter registration? Because this certainly is a priority for the league.
Sure, and I think a lot of people have probably heard about automatic voter registration. The first state that adopted it was Oregon a few years ago, and since then it has really caught on. The basic principle behind it, I think, just makes sense to most people when you hear it. If you change your address with a government agency, then the Secretary of State is alerted to that and they change your address for your voter registration. So if I go to the Ohio Department of Taxation, or I go to the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, or the Department for People with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, or any of those departments, that if I change my address, then your address will be automatically updated unless you opt out. You're also automatically registered if you go there. So for people who go to the Department of Job and Family Services or to the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, they are automatically registered to vote unless they choose to opt out of it. And what we've seen since automatic voter registration has come into play is that it has greatly increased the number of people who are registered to vote, and it's also increasing the turnout for the states that have adopted it. What is also incredibly important, I think, is that it is also saving money for local elections officials, that there are now initial studies that are showing it's cutting down on paperwork, on time that the boards of elections are having to use to do all of the updating and everything. But it also helps with public confidence on how our elections are done. We hear from people all the time through nonpartisan election protection that they were forced to cast a provisional ballot because they didn't appear in the poll books, or because their address hadn't been updated from where they had moved to previously. This cuts down on those types of problems like provisional ballots and makes the voter feel more confident that their vote is actually going to count.
I think it's great. And I want to point out, let's keep in mind that right now with paper, right? All of us mess up paper forms. I do this all the time, right? Put my first name and the last name and then have to do like the arrow, right? We all do that. But also there's a person trying to read our writing and also trying to enter that. There's all kinds of room for human error.
Yeah, and just to add on to that too, as we talked earlier about really equity within the voting rights system, there are a lot of studies that show that people of color, their voter registrations tend to have more of those clerical errors, that the person typing in the name is not as familiar with whatever name is on there. And so, new Americans, people who have uncommon first or last names, oftentimes have a much higher error rate in those voter registration systems.
Great point. Crystal, so we've been talking about mechanical, more of the policies, the things that we can do that would help boost participation. So what are some of those other policies that you think we should really promote to help boost participation?
Honestly, I think Mike has hit on a great one. We've tried multiple things, including now you can register online. There's still multiple challenges with online voter registration. You mentioned the fact that there are challenges with ballots. This, again, would not only free up public dollars and the Board of Elections time to kind of focus on the elections at hand, but it really does increase it. A lot of the marginalized populations, they're right, like Mike listed a whole slew of barriers, and it's true. I'm a single mom, so if I am working full-time, 2 jobs, 1 part-time, I have to grocery shop, etc. It may not even be that I don't care. It may be that I don't have the knowledge base, and not that you don't understand. It's just not something that's a part of your everyday life until the actual election occurs. And because for the lack of information, education, and knowledge, you just show up the day at the Board of Elections like, hey, can I vote? And that's just not true. And to pacify you, you're given a provisional ballot that ultimately does not count, which reflects in the fact that people then don't tend to trust elections or what it does for you. So from the policy aspect, I think that would be the greatest thing since sliced bread, if we were able to push that and make that happen. I can just talk to you a little bit more about, what you can do in the meantime. Policies change in the state of Ohio, sometimes at a snail rate of pace. So to make sure we all activate individuals, the good thing is you all already are a room of experts, right? So I don't need to go through things you already know. I would truly and really just focus on some of the things you may not think about on a daily basis. Use the data. Something as simple as voter registration that we are all passionate about in our everyday lives, we forget. We start with our gut sometimes. It needs to happen because it does, because we care. But you forget to utilize your data to figure out where you should start at and what exactly you should be doing. So like for instance, Cleveland Votes has a summary from the midterms last year that thinks about the city of Cleveland and where you should focus your efforts at. So like Slavic Village had very low voter turnout, St. Clair Superior, Burtonville, Cardin, and the campus district. So instead of putting all your efforts here where you know people actually turn out, engage the population with your data that you know it says does not turn out. Have honest conversation and dialogue. So through the Cleveland Votes model, one of the things that we do is we're a convener, a funder, and then an educator. We fund 17 grantee applicants, that was last year's numbers, and so we usually focus on nonprofits and CDCs because you automatically have a reach into your clientele. You already work with this population every single day. They know you, you have a trusted rapport, you can engage them on more than one occasion, specifically around the things that are important to them for the service they're receiving. So if you do those things, they are more likely to follow up and get out to vote if they register with someone they know, people they've had dialogue with, and people that they trust. Be consistent. So when we talk about civic engagement, our minds usually go straight to the political things, right? Or either you are working for the Board of Elections. The civic engagement is beyond that. It's the opportunity to really celebrate being involved. And so if you think about the idea of making sure you engage people 24/7 to keep them involved with activities, you want census workers, whether you're saying, hey, you could get food if you come, you'd be amazed at how food turns people out. So those kind of opportunities, just letting people know who you normally don't work with, this is how you can get involved, this is how you can stay engaged, and we want you present, make them feel welcome. And then being confident. So don't think just because maybe you don't look like the person that you're trying to engage with, they don't want to hear you. Some people don't, but it's not because of you're a different color. It's just because they're busy and they're like, oh, leave me alone. Okay, I registered already. But be confident, be firm. Those ladies at Nova, I'm telling you, every time I see them at any event, I'm afraid. And I'm going to stop. They say stop. And think about captive audiences. So tonight I was surprised. I have like 20 handouts. I'm like, nobody going to come to a voter registration event on a Tuesday night. Well, I must have been thinking about the city of Cleveland, right? So the one thing that I'm serious, it's bad, but it's true. Like the one thing I've learned over the years is to tag on to an audience that already exists. So if someone else is holding a panel and they've done all the work, your partnership increases with them. Like, hey, can I get on your panel? Maybe have 5 minutes of your time to talk about this. And so you work harder at getting the audience there. So the Ward Club meetings, they already have them there. You spend your time focusing on the area that you want and captivating them with what you have to say. So you get them engaged and they want to participate. And then think about through your prospective agencies where you can have some partnerships. So whether it's around providing transportation, I know there's some audience members who have done that before. They've gathered people together. This one young lady used to have something called Vote Like a Girl. So it was all based on females coming together. The issues that year on the ballot, they went through and kind of discuss what that means, yay or nay. People had questions, they could answer them. And just think about, you know, is there something new you can do with Uber? I know some other states have done some things with Uber, et cetera, to be able to remove some of those barriers. So think about barrier removal, the things you do on an everyday basis, making people feel comfortable, and just being confident in your skill set, and help and understand that people are grateful you are actually there. So it may not seem like it, but we have a lot of gratitude for people to come out and are consistent time and time again, challenging you to participate in this democracy.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you. We got lots of questions. One thing real quick. We did have an introduction that was about the census, but that's not what this is about. So I've gotten a couple census questions. I'm not going to read those because that's not what we're talking. Yes, census is so important, and we're going to cover it at another forum. Okay? So, all right. So we're getting a lot on automatic voter registration, which makes Mike and I really happy because that's a big priority for us down at the State House. One person I think had a clarifying question, and that question real simply was, did you, Mike, say that automatic voter registration already happens in Ohio? And the difference is that what we're saying is an opt-out. So right now, if you go to the only to get your license or something like that, they'll ask if you want to register. And so you opt in. This would be an opt-out. But would you like to explain that a little bit?
What happens right now is based off of a big national law, the National Voter Registration Act, which some of you might remember was always called the Motor Voter Act, right? And that was a piece of federal legislation from the 90s that required certain agencies to do voter registration. So they included the DMV, the Department of Job and Family Services, disability groups, a slew of other places. but they are only required to provide registration information. And they're supposed to ask if you want to register to vote. I have to tell you, I just had a birthday in April and I had to renew my driver's license, and I was on crutches at the time. And so they were very kind at the BMV office and let me sit for a good hour while they were helping other people and I was renewing my license. So I got to listen to the people at the desk at the BMV, and I did not hear a single person ask, would you like to register to vote, right? I think that it's very common that, it's not necessarily a part of the day-to-day interactions, right? This would create a system that would be opting out, so that everybody is included in automatic voter registration, and you have to specifically say, I don't wish to be registered in order not to be registered. And so that is really the change, because when you start asking people, oh, would you like to register to vote? One, you have to trust that the person is going to remember to ask that in the first place. And then two, a lot of people say, well, I'm busy, I gotta, go somewhere else, I don't want to take time to do it. Or, I'm just always accustomed to saying no to everything because they're asking me to do, extra stuff. And I'm like, no, don't want to do that. So it makes the pool a lot larger. So automatic voter registration does not happen in Ohio yet, but hopefully it will soon.
And so with that, folks want to know if there's movement on automatic voter registration. This is a good question for Mike, unless someone else wanted to answer that, both at the federal level and at the state level.
Yes, so there is movement both at the state and federal level. So first of all, on the federal level, many of you are probably familiar with H.R. 1, which is the For the People Act. It was passed out of Congress, but the Senate has not acted on it yet. In H.R. 1, it includes nationwide automatic voter registration. And so, again, that's one of many reforms that are included in H.R. 1, but it's a very important one. In terms of on the state level, certainly automatic voter registration is being pushed in many states, Ohio included. Just a few weeks ago, Secretary of State LaRose announced a bipartisan study commission. So it has, at last count, 3 legislators on it, Republicans and Democrats, to all get together to talk about how we would like to move forward with automatic voter registration. They are really intent, I think, on proposing and pushing legislation in the state of Ohio. I think Secretary LaRose, if you've heard him talk about it, you will know very quickly that he is a real believer in automatic voter registration. I think that he would like nothing better than to pass it here in the state of Ohio. I think that it will take some convincing of our General Assembly, which is where all of you come in. We have to have the people agitating for reform, as we saw with redistricting reform in the past few years. So another good cause for you all to, I think, be active and let your legislator know what reforms we want.
Thank you. And on your what you can do sheet, you have that you can call Senator Portman, who's on the committee that can move this at the federal level in the Senate. And you have that you can call your state legislators. I will just mention that Representative Greenspan is on the committee that would hear this. And I know that several members here have a relationship with him, so that's a great place to start. But every legislator needs to hear from us about automatic voter registration. All right, let's go to early voting. Tony, how's early voting working? And make sure, I'm got a request to make sure you're a little closer.
A little
here.
closer?
Yeah.
Okay. So, early voting, I think it works well in Cuyahoga County, but it can work better, and that's for sure. Early voting starts the day after the close of registration. The hours for it have been set by the Secretary of State. We used to have, boards of elections used to have some say in that, and that all became uniform under former Secretary Husted. We liked being able to make the adjustments for our own county, and they're not codified, so maybe we'll get that opportunity again. And the reason being that you have 88 counties and you can't treat, I don't think you can treat county that has 1 million registered voters the same as a county that has maybe 11,000 registered voters. There's different needs, so we kind of get, we have some challenges with that. But we staff it up. Anyone who's come down and used it, we get you through as quick as we can. I think it's very accurate. Everyone's very pleasant. A challenge that we have, and hopefully one of the legislators will take this up, is that another thing that the current law dictates is that every county only gets one early voting location. Again, we have 1 million registered voters, almost 11,000. Maybe there could be a little bit of a different need. In presidential general elections, on the final weekend when we're open, we literally have people up and down the street, thousands and thousands of people who come in one day to vote. Surpasses some of the other counties what they do in the whole 28 days that they do. So we do the best that we can with what we have. Specifically, we know that this is an issue in Cuyahoga County, so we're trying to figure out what we can do. If we can do something different for November of 2020. If we can either get a location to go to for the one time that has more parking, more space, those types of things, but it's difficult to try to get someone, if you find a vacant Walmart or Giant Eagle and say, hey, can you lease that for just a 6-week period? They go, well, no. We don't want to pass up on some of the long-term things, so it's hard to find someone who will want to do that. But that's what we're trying to do for 2020, because we know it's an issue. The county is working with us to try to help find something. Hopefully get a more permanent solution, because voters can become creatures of habit, so you don't want to be having them go to different spots at different points in time. But that's what we're going to do with that. Legislators did pass a law, House Bill 41, that impacted early voting. It went into effect this past May, and that's for all the counties. And what that does is it makes early voting a little bit more similar to what happens at Election Day. Previously, early in-person voting was voting by mail without going to the post office and mailing your ballot. So you would come down to the Board of Elections in the prior, you would fill out the same application, fill out the ballot, put it in the same ID envelope that you would as if you were going to mail. You would drop it in a box and we would process it that way. House Bill 41 has changed now, where we actually have scanners in the polling locations. So you come in, you get your ballot. You can now show ID at our early voting location like you can at the polls, or a driver's license or any other form of acceptable ID. So you don't have to fill out an application, but you still can if you don't have the ID. So we get you a ballot a little bit quicker. It is similar to Election Day. You vote your ballot. Now we have scanners in there, so you can scan your ballot when you're done, which hopefully gives people confidence, because they are putting their ballot into the scanner, the same scanners that people do on Election Day. It also gives you that second chance voting, which means if you by accident overvote a contest, now that machine will recognize that and pause and give you a message saying, hey, this particular contest voted too many times, you want to make a change. That's what happens at the polls now, and when the voter makes a choice, yes, I want to make that mistake, and accept, or no, and then they can get their ballot voided and then get a clean ballot and go ahead and vote that.
Thank you. I would like to break down a little bit more about having more than one location per county, whether Crystal or Mike or someone else. Like, can we just talk a little bit more about why that's not happening and why we think that matters?
Why is it not happening? Well, because current law says you can't. And so one of the challenges that when we try to make changes to some of these laws, of the 88 counties, there's a whole lot of little counties, way more than the big counties. And so a representative from a little county and a representative from a big county, their vote counts equal. So when we have a lot more, I think that's one of the biggest barriers, is that these smaller counties, they don't want multiple locations. Sometimes they don't want the one that they have. So they just want to do election day voting. So to get them to say, hey, it's okay to have more than one, or even if you have legislation that says, you know, you don't have to have more than one unless you have over 100,000 voters or something like that. They get hesitant. They don't want to pass that. So that's one of the challenges that we've had to try to get that. You want more because you make it easier. You if you have them sporadically spread out through the county, it's more accessible to people to go there. It gives them a little bit more opportunity to engage in voting because they don't have to wait for election day, and if they don't want to go by mail, well, maybe it's easier to swing in somewhere closer over that 28-day window to vote. So I mean, those are reasons to get it, but why we don't really is because it gets into a large versus small type things a lot of times in Columbus, and a lot of times large loses out, even though if you take Cuyahoga, Franklin, and Hamilton County, the three largest counties, you take all registered voters, it's equal to almost the 44 smallest counties combined. However, that's 44 votes versus 3, so you lose every time.
Thank you for that. And I know Mike wants, well, Mike's getting the mic. I just want to say I grew up in one of those little counties, and I'll tell you what, like I had to drive to, we had to go a town over for me to get my driver's license. Okay, so it's not actually easier for those, even though there may be some of those communities, you know, the officials don't want to have more than one location. The truth is that there's not transit that goes between towns and these rural areas. There's not an easy way to get maybe a half an hour, 40 minutes away to the early voting location. So there's a reason for the access piece, but I agree with you. And I think some of it is budgets is certainly a piece of this. But Mike, I wanted to hear your perspective on early voting.
No, I think that that's almost exactly what I was going to say, Jen, in terms of, you know, when you look at early voting, I'm old enough that I remember when the original fight over early in-person hours happened. And, you know, a lot of people at the State House said, well, early in-person voting is really only used by urban counties, and it's just a tool to get out the Democratic vote. Was often the partisan way that it boiled down. But if you look at all 88 counties, since we have enacted early in-person voting, the numbers of people in every single county across the board have continued to grow in terms of who votes early in person. That everybody likes convenience, whether you live in Cuyahoga County or Vinton County or Lucas County. Doesn't matter where you live, people like convenience and they like the ability to go and vote early. And I actually really agree with the idea that I think there's a really strong argument to be made that actually rural counties may actually need more locations, even in a more dire way than urban counties do. When I think about growing up in Van Wert County, which is incredibly rural, I have friends and family that lived 15 minutes outside of the city center, or 15 miles outside of the city center. So they would have to drive, 20 minutes to get to downtown, and that's where the early voting site is. There is no such thing as public transportation in rural America. There is just no infrastructure there whatsoever. Here it's not very convenient, but you can probably get on a bus to get to most places. It'll take you a long time, but you can at least get on a bus. It's impossible in rural America. And so I think that, there is an argument that we need multiple locations, not just in urban counties, but in rural counties as well, because there are voters who live far away from the early voting site that could really use those early in-person days and hours.
And 20 minutes actually to an early voting site would be, a 20-minute drive I'd say is not even average. I think probably a lot of times it's even farther. So, because the thing about rural counties is they cover more geography often. So, but yeah, let's keep going. I've been getting a lot of questions about engaging young people. Crystal, would you like to talk about engaging young people and how do we get them excited about voting? How do we help them understand voting? What should we be doing in that regard?
I think the one thing to kind of consider is that young people know more than you think they do. My son is 11 years old, and I'm telling you, he knew what the ERA was. In a presentation, he goes to Campus International on women's rights and equity, and I was amazed. I'm sure he knows more than me, and I'm a female. So not underestimating how intelligent children already are, and starting early, right? It's almost like the idea of prevention versus treatment. So again, one of Cleveland Vote's charges is to educate and work with nonprofits to actually go out and activate the challenges in the communities. And so Nova, who I continuously mention, but they're like just pretty darn good, is usually one of our awardees and has been since Cleveland Votes activated in 2013. One of the things that they do on a consistent, and remember the key word here is consistent basis, year-round voter mobilization, is they go into high schools. And they usually activate that challenge around summertime or a little bit before summer, before they let out, to capture or captivate those 17-year-olds who will be eligible soon. But even the idea of doing some level of forums or engagement 11th grade year, because they see you again. Now they see you twice. Now they see you 3 times. They know you're serious. They know who to reach out to if they have questions. And then you have to give them the activity to do. That's how you keep people engaged. Hey, 16-year-old, do you want to go out and knock on doors with us? Do you want to go and serve this? Do you want to go and do these things? If you keep people engaged, you are consistent with your message, and don't underestimate the power of their own intelligence. They probably could teach you something. Then I think you have a really good chance at mobilizing younger voters. Anybody else want to hear?
Do you want to explain your Youth at the Booth program a little bit in case folks don't know?
So we partner with various schools to get high school seniors to come and work as poll workers. And so when we had more money in our budget, we had a bigger program, and those had been additional workers that we would get into the polling locations. And as the budgets have dried up, the program has shrunk a little bit because now it takes the place of some other poll workers that we had. But what we try to do is we go in, we work with various people at the various schools, and a lot of times it's a history teacher who gets involved, and they allow us to come in, and they recruit for us. We do our training at the school of the students, and then we go ahead and we try to assign them to a location that's close to where they live, because transportation can be an issue for them. You can't expect them at 5 o'clock in the morning to get across town. So we try to work through some of those things, but what we find is that they get excited about the opportunity. Now that we have electronic poll books and polling locations, there's more technology, so they think it's like their phone. So they get in there, where some people are hesitant to grab on that, they literally go right to it, and so they love helping people with it. We get a lot of good positive feedback from voters who said, the kids were great, they were happy to be there. And what we hope then is that they continue to be poll workers as they graduate from school. They actually get engaged in the voting process and learn more about it. Of course, talk to their friends and hopefully spread the word. But it is a good program. It's sometimes difficult though to get schools to get the buy-in, even though we do all the work. And but it's something that hopefully we can grow a little bit later.
Great, thank you. And just one note, again, Mike and I have talked about, and a lot of the voting rights groups down in Columbus have talked about extending that to 16-year-olds as well, just so maybe we get more youth involved. All right, let's talk about how the number of polling locations is decided and where polling locations are placed and how that impacts turnout and accessibility and equitability as well, equity as well.
Do you want to start with the process?
Sure. So changing a polling location is, you would think you stole somebody's firstborn child. We get so enraged. We get more complaints or phone calls over that than anything else. It's a difficult task. So by statute, a precinct can't have more than 1,400 registered voters. So we try to, as we create our precincts, the smallest voting jurisdiction in the county, we shoot for about 1,000, 1,100 as our target goal for voters in there. And so then you figure out, okay, we need now to find a place for these individuals in the precinct to vote, because everybody from a precinct will vote at the same location. So one of the first things we do is we go out and we canvass, we try to find buildings that are ADA accessible. And the ADA accessibility is a huge challenge for us. It's standards that are set by the Secretary of State that actually go, I think, above and beyond what a lot of businesses are required to do. So we try to find locations that have easy access to it, that pass this test, which is a difficult test, we then have different things that we look for. Depending on how many precincts we do in location, we try to get a certain number of parking spots. We try to come up with some, internally, we've tried to come up with some internal square footage type information. We figure out if you have one precinct, you need X number of square feet, and for every one you add on, you need to add X number of additional square feet to do that. So you need to find a room that can have that. So there's all these different things that we take into consideration. We are able to use public buildings as polling locations, and some public buildings welcome us, and a lot of them don't. So a lot of schools are not interested in having us as polling locations because they feel it's a security issue for them. Unfortunately, though, schools are great places because they have gyms, and usually they are ADA accessible and stuff like that, so we have some of those challenges. So then we reach out and we try to go public as much as we can, and when we can't, then we roll over into private entities, which is a lot of times we would use different churches, which had been a good location for us, but now more and more churches are becoming daycares, so then we get kicked out, and then could be paid $300 to a private location, which isn't a whole lot of money, but that's what we pay. And so those are, so we do that. So we're looking for sufficient parking, we're looking for a room that has the right size, has good lighting, meets the ADA checklist. I forget how many pages, but it's huge. And so we try to do that, and again, we try to make sure that there is good accessibility to it. And we, believe it or not, we try not to move them once we set them. People don't believe that, but that really, that's the case.
Well, it seems like it would be more work for you to move it once you've already set it, right? So I believe you probably aren't trying to do that on purpose. Real quick though, I have this question, and I think it's maybe some misinformation, this idea that the use of electronic poll books and or the increase in people voting early has led to a reduction in polling locations.
No, that's not. So it when we figure out the polling locations, we don't take into consideration like voter turnout. And I mean, we do for parking reasons, that kind of stuff. But I guess like we look at the number of voters in the location, whether you vote early or by mail or whatever. We don't pay attention to that because we're looking to what potentially who could show up on election day. So. So that, that's not taken into it. Electronic poll books has caused us to change the way in which polling locations are set up on the inside because the logistics are different with that. It does allow us to get people through the check-in process quicker, but again, it really doesn't, as far as where the locations are located or the size of the rooms or any of those types of things, that's not part of it. One thing electronic poll books have required us to do is we go out and we do look for connectivity. And so even if there is no connectivity, it doesn't mean you still can't be a polling location, but then we get into buying antennas and running them outside and all that type of stuff to make it work.
Great, okay, so just to be clear, that question, this idea that somehow using poll books reduces polling locations is not the case. And that goes back to that misinformation. Even with a room full of democracy pros, sometimes we can have information that's wrong. And so I think that's great that we have forums like this. Go ahead, Nick.
I just wanted to speak to the polling place issue, particularly from the perspective of the voter. It is true, ADA accessibility is a huge issue, and it's a huge barrier for people with disabilities. After the 2016 election, the federal government did a survey, and they found that only half of polling places nationwide actually met ADA accessibility in the 2016 election. So it's a big problem across the country that while we've had the ADA for a number of years, it is really an unfulfilled promise to the disability community that many buildings are still not fully accessible to them, and that there are still issues in terms of barriers. And so I think it's really wonderful that the Ohio Secretary of State and the Board of Elections go this extra mile to really make sure that our polling places are accessible for people with disabilities, because it's a really critical need. In terms of on election day, I was one of the people with the NAACP doing nonpartisan election protection in 2018, and Tony's right. The number one call that we got was I went to what I thought was my polling location, and it had moved. And just the impact on that voter, I think very similar to as Crystal and I were talking. If you are a person who is working 2 jobs, you got to drop your kids off at childcare, you've got a whole bunch of other responsibilities, maybe you took public transportation to get to that polling location, the impact on that voter of then saying, okay, then I have to go and get onto the bus to get to the new polling location. We saw where that really impacted voters in the 2018 election. And so, I think some of the things that we might want to think about in the future are, what are ways that we're getting out the word to the communities about polling location changes? State law requires that boards of elections send postcards to voters to let them know that their polling location has changed, which is great. But I think, as we've talked about in terms of voter purges and other issues, there are many people that don't look at mail that come from government agencies and have a high rate of suspicion about those things. And so, are there other ways that we can reach out to those communities? And I think it's really great that we have a community engagement team at the Cuyahoga Board of Elections that I think is really open to working with community groups to get the word out about those polling location changes and making sure that people know that. And I think one other reform that I would like to put out there for our state that I've seen in other states like Arizona is they've actually passed things like voting centers, where you just have a place to vote in the places to vote in the county. And let's say I live in Lakewood, but I work in Cleveland Heights. I could show up to the polling place close to my job in Cleveland Heights, and they would be able to pull up and print out a Lakewood ballot for me to vote. And because we're all connected on a county-wide level, they would be able to track so that I wouldn't vote multiple times in a single day. And that works in a lot of communities. And so you lose that problem of people showing up to the wrong location, because now there isn't a wrong location. Wherever you go and vote, you can get a ballot.
So Crystal, we've heard a lot about misinformation, and I've heard a lot about distrust. I appreciated your concept of being consistent and showing up a lot, and that maybe that's part of what all of us need to do. But give us some more ideas in terms of how we build more trust in the voting system, or more trust that someone's vote counts, or more trust that even maybe the person that they're voting for would be interested in representing them. So talk about trust for us.
Sure. So I've kind of mentioned the fact that Cleveland Votes has a specific model based off our original funder, Nonprofit Vote, where the goal is to work directly with nonprofit organizations and help them implement voter education, engagement, and registration within their capacity in their organizations. So one of the reasons for that is because nonprofits can look like many different things. You can go all the way from a social enterprise like an Edwards model, to a Cleveland Clinic, to an arts district, to a social service provider. And so when you think about the opportunity to engage with someone on an ongoing basis for a delivery, especially of a social service. So for instance, when the Affordable Health Care Act rolled out and the federally qualified health centers were able to provide some level of Medicaid applications and enrollment, et cetera, they were some of our original funders for Cleveland Votes, because we wanted the opportunity for people to come back in for a health service. It's not likely you're coming once, right? So once you get the Medicaid benefit, you may have some follow-ups to come through, whether it's about your physical health, mental health, et cetera. And so you're working with this federally qualified health center on an ongoing basis. And so that's an opportunity for that worker to talk about why you were able to get that Medicaid application. What changed as a single individual, how that relates to your public benefit, what does that mean? And like right now we have it going on where it looks like the county is getting ready to kind of implement or roll out people having to have a work requirement for your Medicaid. Well, I'm surprised that hasn't been challenged yet, but it's probably because our federal government is keeping us on our toes. The reality is when the Affordable Health Care Act rolled out, that is no longer a public benefit. That's a healthcare option. Therefore, you should not be able to have a work requirement for it like you do with food assistance, etc. So I go through this long tangent to say, if you think about what your issue area is, you are likely to be able to engage that individual and speak to them about what you individually do. You know what you do in your organization on an everyday basis and how that relates to something that they're actually receiving. Because if I can't relate to anything else, if I don't think the street lights matter, if I don't care that I live in a raggedy ghetto, if I don't care that the cat gets killed, I'm immune to violence, etc., the things that I may be able to relate to are the benefits that I'm receiving right now and how that relates to me and how I want to keep them. And so if you want to keep them, you are in charge of that fate, and this is how you are in charge of that fate. So just being able to break it down in layman's terms, being able to have that conversation and understanding, be a master of your organization, know what you do and know how to convey that to individuals, and that's how you keep them engaged and relating it to the political process. And it does not go against anything if you're a C3, if you do that type of education and engagement. And so Cleveland Votes does do a training every summer on the do's and don'ts of voter engagement, so it does not impact your tax exempt status.
Great, that's awesome. And I love that Susan Mernan sent me a note of the exact same thing that I wanted to do. So I do just want to mention there's a lot of things about information, a lot of questions about information. All of that was really good. Let's meet folks where they are to get them registered, to get them the information. You know, the League of Women Voters of Ohio is 100 years old. The Cleveland League is 100 years old. The U.S. League is 100 years old. And one of the things that we've always done well, literally we started in the 1920s and it started in Ohio, are those voter guides, those nonpartisan voter guides. So I do want to make sure, and now they're online, vote411.org. You can go there, you can put in your address, and you will get information. One thing I want to tell you about that I think a lot of people don't know, we talk about trust. Vote411.org was the only place you could get the information from every governor's candidate in Ohio last year. There were actually 7. And so, because anyone who's running, if they're a write-in, if they're a minority party, if they're a majority party, they can all put their information in there, and we actually can't edit it. Okay? So anyone who's running can put their information in there, and we don't edit it. So I was getting calls sometimes like, well, the website has pictures for some people, but not for other people. Some people didn't upload some of the candidates didn't upload their pictures, right? I can't upload a picture for them. I'm not going to upload a picture for them. So that whole idea of who are our trusted messengers, and I just want to remind folks, if you hear people say they don't know who the candidates are, that's a good source. We also have Judicial Votes Count, which is about how the judicial system works, how courts work. Talk about a group of candidates who affect our daily lives, from traffic tickets to divorce hearings to all those things. And yet it's the #1 kind of election that people skip, right, are the judges. So Judicial Votes Count has the same information as Vote 411, but it also has a lot about courts. And with that, I know that Tony, when we were talking in our phone call before this, you were mentioning something interesting, which is how we see so much more turnout for when there are elections at the national level than we have locally. And I just wanted to kind of have you kind of pontificate on that a little bit.
Well, it's, so every 4 years, so next year, there's gonna be all kinds of money that comes out of the woodwork for those presidential elections. And everybody gets all excited and they get hopped up and they go and they vote, and that's great. And maybe we'll get up to 70% turnout in Cuyahoga County. And then the election will pass and everybody disappears. The money goes away, but just because money goes away doesn't mean that people should be showing up and voting. And all of a sudden now you get down into turnout that's in the teens for things. And people, and it's really bad. I mean, and those are elections like these little local, well, not little, they're local elections that you're electing your council people, you're electing your mayors and things like that, things that impact you actually probably more so than the national level. Your police and fire, your rubbish collection, your snow plowing, all that kind of stuff. And people, they don't get engaged. And I think, that's what we need people to keep that excitement and stay engaged and always, just keep showing up and voting. And why they don't vote in the local ones, I don't know. I think they think it doesn't impact them, but it impacts them actually probably more so. I think after like next year's presidential election, everyone's gonna be tired of probably the political ads and the advertisements and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, and then they get sometimes they get a bad taste in their mouth from that, but it's not fair then to the local officials who are running because they're not like that. And it's unfortunate how low that goes down, and they're just as important as the president. In my opinion, they're no less important. Different office, but it doesn't matter. Every election that you're involved in is affecting you somehow, whether it's your taxes and it's affecting your pocketbook or whatever it is, or funding for libraries or all that kind of stuff. You have to always be engaged in it, and we find the time, but you do have to find the time, or one of the ways to do it, because they're all, in my mind, equally important.
Can I speak a little bit
Yeah.
to this? So my daytime hat, which drives me crazy, it aged me beyond years. Serving as the director for the Office of Reentry is an interesting opportunity as well. So to give you one classic example, right, all of our judges, including one of the most powerful positions there is, our county prosecutor is elected. And so we are very fortunate here in the state of Ohio that if you have been incarcerated, once you have served your time in a state institution, in order to be able to exercise your right to vote, all you have to do is re-register. That is it. And so there are a couple other nuances that I'll go through as we talk about this, but one very live example was last year with Issue 1. So Issue 1 obviously would have been the Drug Rehabilitation Act. It has some stuff about retroactively going back and looking at sentencing and changing guidelines, et cetera, and putting some money and dollars into treatment. That's a direct impact on the individuals that I serve on a day-to-day basis with criminal backgrounds. And so what we did as an Office of Reentry, we are not allowed to lobby, we are not allowed to advocate, but you have a fine line between education and advocacy. We allow some of the individuals who serve as ambassadors on that campaign to come and speak to the individuals just so they knew about it. I mean, it's a good chance they had no idea what the Drug Rehabilitation Act was, what Issue 1 was, and so how do you get it, right? That captive audience. We work with our halfway houses. So you're not fully done serving your sentence, you're still technically incarcerated. You don't have to come, but again, you really can't go anywhere else during that time. It's a couple females there, it's food. So like, I say it all the time and it sounds horrible, but yeah, we're like pimping ourselves out. We're gonna give you free food if you come listen, and I'm going to, you know, have a couple girls that maybe you haven't seen in a while, but you're gonna listen. And so how I got you there, has nothing to do with what you learned when you were there and how we were able to activate you. And then we work with our Board of Elections to be in the back and kind of provide voter registration at the time. Generally what we see in terms of numbers from that day is we get usually 80% of individuals registered, and if they did not register, it's only because they actually were already registered since they had come home. And so just in case anyone runs into individuals with a criminal background and they tell you, no, I can't vote because I have a background, it's absolutely not true. You can vote when you're in a halfway house, you can vote while you're on probation, you can vote while you're on parole, you can actually vote even while you are incarcerated at the county jail, so long as you have not been sentenced or convicted yet. You can still vote.
Okay, what kind of crime? It's not any crime. What level?
Oh no, it is. It could be a felony or a misdemeanor because you haven't been convicted yet.
Right, but what I'm saying is, like, if you are serving time for a misdemeanor, you can vote.
No, if you're serving time, period, in any state institution, you cannot vote at the time you're serving the sentence.
That's true for state prisons, but if you're serving time in a county jail for a misdemeanor, then you can vote. But I think that's
So let's back up and just make sure we're all clear.
Yeah.
So, because I think one of the things I hear all the time is, well, so-and-so is in jail, right? So so-and-so can't vote. Well, not all jails are the same, and the rules aren't the same. So can you just back up when, yeah, go ahead.
So the great state of Cuyahoga County, I call it a state, right? Our jails have been regionalized. And that just occurred within the last 2 years. The county controls all municipal jails. The first 2 locations that we physically took control of was Euclid Jail and Bedford Jail. That is where our sentence population goes. So that's even if you're serving sentence on a felony. There are some individuals, their first time nonviolent offenders, they serve their sentence by the legislature. That's in the General Assembly that's codified that you will serve your sentence here in our local jail. There are some individuals who may be serving out a probation stint, so you violate it, and instead of sending you upstate, they allow you to serve the time within the county jail. And sometimes there are misdemeanor offenses. You may get placed in jail for sometimes it might be like a DUI, et cetera. You're serving a small 3-day or 72-hour stint on. And so I think what Mike is probably referencing is if those individuals on that misdemeanor offense are incarcerated at the time, yes, they can register. But if you are in a state institution, that means Ohio Department of Rehab and Corrections, we only have one within Cuyahoga County, that's Northeast Pre-Release, that's the women's prison. You're serving your sentence, or any other state institution, you cannot vote, but the minute you get out, all you have to do is re-register. So the legalese from the Secretary of State is very confusing, but all you have to know is pretty much all you need to do is re-register. Yes, you can vote, and our Board of Elections works really well with our Office of Ring and Creed to ensure that Simeon Best, whose name was mentioned a couple times while Michelle was up there, he works with one of my staff members to go inside of our county jail to make sure they can register individuals as well. And I found out about that wonderful ordinance with Mike about making a different polling location. It was a sneak attack. We wanted to do what Chicago did and make the jail a polling location because it's such a transient population, but it is our revised code that kind of stopped us from that wonderful.
Okay, but let's talk about that too. So, someone is in jail. They are not serving a felony. They're not in the middle of serving a sentence for a felony.
Yeah.
How do they can't just, they can register, but they also can vote. How does that work?
So we do have a process here in the state of Ohio. When I was at the ACLU, we worked with the county to start the process here in Cuyahoga County. NOVA and the Office of Reentry do most of that work now. Myself and my colleague China, who's sitting over there, we actually went into the Lake County Board of Elections, or Lake County Jail this past election, and we registered 75 people and got them absentee ballots. What's interesting too is that those individuals were really engaged. I was not giving them any information about what was on the ballot or whatever, but they all knew about the governor, they all knew about issue 1. They were really energized to be part of the political process. So the way that you can do that is, a person who is in jail can register to vote 35 days before the election or earlier, just like any other person in the state of Ohio. The problem and why there isn't always a program going on is you have to have somebody to go in and actually get them the voter registration form. We're very lucky, again, in Cuyahoga County that we have the Board of Elections and a county administration that is very committed to having nonpartisan groups go in and help register individuals who want to be registered. But I can tell you, with 88 counties in the state and 70-some full-service jails, that does not happen at all or even most of the other jails in the state. Similarly, with voting, then you have to fill out a form to be able to vote. What is really nice, though, is that Ohio does allow a special process for people who are incarcerated. It's the same process that they use for somebody who's hospitalized or put into a nursing home who needs to have the ballot delivered to them. Because if you think about having the ballot mailed to the person at the jail, well, jail mail is a little funny. And it takes a little while to get to the person. Also, then they'd have to come up with a stamp to mail it back to the Board of Elections, so that is not easy. So Ohio law actually allows for the person to fill out this special form, and then that's delivered to the Board of Elections, and the Board of Elections sends 2 staff members, a Republican and a Democrat, to administer that ballot to that incarcerated person. And it works really well. In Cuyahoga County, there have been hundreds of people who have used these on any given election. And in Lake County, we had 75 folks who used it. There are also voting programs in the Montgomery County Jail, the Lorain County Jail, the Licking County Jail, and we're hoping to get more started very soon. So it does exist, but again, without activists kind of pushing for it to happen, it doesn't always happen because neither the Board of Elections or the sheriff are really required to go in and do this. But we believe very strongly that those types of programs should be happening. So if people are interested in being part of those types of programs in your community, we have a group that's doing it in Cuyahoga County, but if you live in another county as well, would love to talk with you about how to get that started in your county.
Great. All right, I know it's time to wrap up. I just want to remind you that there's all kinds of things that you can do. I want to remind you that the first that's in invisible ink is to join the League of Women Voters. And so I would like each one of you to give a 30-second, your last thing that you would like this crowd to know and or do.
When we talk about turning out more voters, it's not just about getting the people who registered but didn't show up to show up. It's about converting the people who have opted out of the system, who aren't even registered, to become engaged. And you know, I've seen it over my years of activism that it is possible to do. As Tony and Crystal both mentioned, it takes a year-long commitment, and that's why I'm so glad we're here right now doing this forum in 2019, because you know, just parachuting in September of 2020 does not work. We need to have long-standing activism, and we're excited to be here as a partner to help work with you all to do that.
I love that, parachuting in, I'm still in that. So yeah, just like Mike said, you know, start early, plan early. Please attend our voter engagement training. It's usually held in July. And so like most volunteers, we wear multiple hats. I have about 3 jobs, and I'm a part of maybe 5 volunteer organizations. So you can always spread that word in terms of getting people there to talk about the do's and don'ts, to have a couple live examples. And every year we try to add something new based upon some of the questions and feedback we receive from the following year, so it won't be exactly the same. In terms of Cleveland Votes, again, racial equity and inclusion, I think a lot of times we use the word equity, but what does equity really mean? Making sure you understand those marginalized populations, making sure you understand what equity really means and how you can implement it. And so there are trainings that Cleveland Votes has in Cleveland Neighborhood Progress. The census, again, so part of that whole county commitment, they're broken into subcommittees. Cleveland Votes chairs the Community Engagement Committee. So if you're not interested in being a part of, I don't know, workforce or whatever other committees, and you just feel like this is where the league or one of your other partner or volunteer organizations falls, that's an opportunity. And then just advocacy in general. I work a lot with Cleveland Neighborhood Progress in my full-time capacity in terms of attorneys and what you do, kind of understanding that the idea of reentry is really just the definition of transition, but what it really breaks into is providing equity, providing access for individuals, and not letting the scarlet letter brand them. So there are multiple ways to kind of get engaged, and so I have a whole list here, and I also have Jennifer Lumpkin's contact information, who's our civic engagement strategist. And if you want to do anything with the Office of Reentry, I'm always glad to have support, and we welcome it.
Great.
I want everyone in this room to have faith that the elections that we conduct in Cuyahoga County, that they are accurate. We have a 99.9% accuracy rate. We are, I think, the only county in the state that we voluntarily audit every single election that we have. We're only required to do that in even years, but we have nothing to hide, so we do that. So I want, hopefully, you to believe that, and then if you believe that, you push that off, because it's true, not because I'm saying that there's statistics behind it to prove it. We try to run a transparent operation. We have nothing to hide. So as you're out there, you're trying to get people engaged, spread that message. Spread the message that all elections are important, no matter how big or small the names on the ballot are. So get engaged, become a habitual voter. Every time you have the chance, go ahead and do that. Use our website. There's information out there. Don't guess. Take a look. There's sample ballots out there. You can see what's going on. We do have a community outreach department, so as you're planning events and you want someone there from the Board of Elections, we send staff out to that. And it's not just 8:30 to 4:30 Monday through Friday. Those individuals in that department know that you go nights, you go weekends, whatever it is, get in touch with us. We'll get somebody there to help you out. Do trainings on registration, the do's and don'ts of it. We want to be a resource for that. And it goes beyond our community outreach department. People in registration, the absentee. We'll get people there who you need to educate the groups that you're trying to educate on different voting processes, because we truly do want to be a partner with all the various organizations out there, and we want them to have faith and confidence that their vote is counted.
And with that, I just want to say thank you to the Cleveland League and to the library for putting this together, and let's give a round of applause.